Good evening. This is Rachel Blomquist, librarian at the Putnam County Public Library. Welcome to tonight's program, Jewel of the Illinois River. Before we begin, just a few reminders. On Tuesday, October 29th at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host Katie Cusera, ecologist, and Justin Siebert, site manager, at the Sue and West Dixon Waterfowl Refuge for a presentation on how the refuge was restored, information on the rich variety of flora and fauna that can be found at this local natural area, and the importance of the refuge to migratory waterfowl. This program is made possible through a grant from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and SciStarter. On Tuesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host Bruce Treadway from the National Museum of the American Sailor for a presentation on naval aviation history at the Naval Station Great Lakes. And on Tuesday, December 3rd at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host James Joel Napper, NASA Solar System Ambassador, for a presentation on how holidays are celebrated in space. All library programming is free and open to the public, and it is also shareable, so please feel free to pass the information on to others. And now, tonight, let's welcome Elizabeth Novice. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Rachel. I'm grateful to be here. Let me share my screen. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ellie Novice. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Havana along the Illinois River. I've been working here for about a year now. I've become fascinated with the history of the area, and that's what I'll be covering today. In today's presentation, we will learn from sources like wildlife refuge narratives, natural history surveys, naturalist journals, and French explorer accounts written over decades to get an idea of what this area used to be like and what changes have been made since. Let's see. Before I get into the history, I'd like to introduce the Fish and Wildlife Refuge System for those who aren't completely familiar with it. It is similar to the National Park System. The National Wildlife Refuge System manages land for the benefit of the American people. The system protects habitat for more than 700 species of birds, more than 200 species of mammals, and more than 1,000 species of fish. This is a map of the refuge system and its regions. You can visit our website there at the top to find out the wildlife refuges around the country, the best times to visit, and their events. There's a refuge in every state. Each one is different than the next. Most refuges do not charge a fee, and a lot of them provide internship and volunteer opportunities, especially here. So if you're interested in volunteering here at Chautauqua or Emaquan, feel free to email me or call the office or email Illinois River Refuges at fishandwildlife.gov. So Congress placed over 16,000 acres of land and water in the Illinois River floodplain into the National Wildlife Refuge System. The Illinois River, now used as a commercial navigation channel, passes along or through most of these tracts. Refuge lands along the river are managed primarily for the benefit and preservation of fish and wildlife. One second. Yes, so they're managed for the preservation of fish and wildlife while also contributing greatly to recreation, flood storage, and water supply functions of the system. The Illinois River Refuges Complex includes 3 refuges: Chautauqua, Emaquan, and Meredosia. They can all be found along the Illinois River. Both Chautauqua and Emaquan are near Havana, while Meredosia is about an hour and a half south along the river near Beardstown and across Spunky Bottoms, which that's managed by the Nature Conservancy. The refuge complex includes more than 12,000 acres and growing. Here on the map, you can see the entire Illinois River Basin outlined. The entire refuge complex lies in the heart of it. Including state-managed lands, about 10% of the Illinois River floodplain is managed for fish and wildlife purposes. This wonderful basin provides for bald eagle roosting and feeding areas, heron and egret nesting colonies, waterfowl use areas, migratory and resident bird habitat, mussel and fingernail clam habitat, sport and commercial fisheries, and important native fish habitats. So very important. It's a good chunk of the state. I love showing this drawing. Speaking of Emaquan, we'd have to go back in time to really understand what's changed. But I love mentioning this quote at the top right there where it says the water was so clean that we could drink from it, and we could see fish before they bit. That's an account of Emaquan, which Thompson Lake and Flag Lake, which you see right there, that's what we call Emaquan today, before changes were made, which we'll get into that. Thompson Lake was the largest and most recognized backwater lake on the Illinois River. It was once a complete biological paradise. And Native American artifacts have been found here that are as old as 6,000 years old. French explorers in the late 1600s, including Pere Marquette and Louis Joliet, made their way up the Illinois River and witnessed Native American tribes who were combined together in a confederation called Illiniwek. A 1773 journal describes the area. Here is plenty of buffalo, deer, elk, and turkeys. Residents would call Emaquan Blue Lake because of its crystal clear. It was crystal clear and looked blue during the day. And as I mentioned earlier, residents would drink and swim in it. And the abundant wildlife in the area attracted many tourists, specifically naturalists. There's a quote that says, we found it to be with quantities of game almost everywhere, of various sorts and kinds, such as swans, bustards, thrushes, geese, ducks, teals, and other kinds, as well as fish in plenty. And there's some quotes in there that I like to put, just describing the biodiversity of the area historically. That's another quote right there that I like to mention a lot. It just highlights how many birds there were back then, enough that it would block out the sunlight. An 1877 sportsman guide by Charles Halleck describes how the area is the most noted sporting grounds in Illinois. The game here is of great variety and abundance, consisting of ducks, the mallard, water summer, blue and green-winged teal, widgeon, canvasback, and nearly all the other inland varieties, with several of the saltwater species. Historically, the middle reaches of the Illinois River's floodplain supported a vast mosaic of clear, shallow lakes, sloughs, bottomland hardwood forests, and tallgrass prairies. It's a lot of ducks, huh? Tales of hunting expeditions highlighted the abundance of waterfowl and fish in the area. It is an overwhelming feeling to watch thousands of ducks and geese take flight at once. Today's numbers of ducks are only a fraction of the abundance once found here 100 years ago. By 1911, Thompson Lake, which is what we call Emaquan today, soon became known as the most famous and useful breeding ground for various fish that abound in the Illinois River, and also a wonderful feeding ground for ducks while pursuing their migratory flights. On November 15, 1877, the Fulton Democrat reported that last week was remarkable hunting among the hunters of wildfowl in this vicinity. Thompson Lakes was alive with ducks of various species, and the cold, wet weather rendered them almost wholly oblivious of the presence of the hunters. A natural result was that thousands of them were killed. Hunting season brought hunters from Chicago, Peoria, and other Illinois towns, as well as from out of state to the Havana area. Even President Benjamin Harrison visited Havana to hunt waterfowl. A railroad worker described the transferring of one fellow that left Havana twice a week with 500 ducks each time for Chicago. There was one account that I read that they said they could close their eyes and just start shooting in the air and they would be able to kill ducks because it was just so abundant. As wetlands decreased at the turn of the century, wealthy hunters bought thousands of acres of Illinois River land and built gun clubs on them. By the 1940s, up to 60% of the state's waterfowl habitat, concentrated in 33 counties, was privately owned. Some claimed that Thompson Lake, or what today we call Emaquan, as the fishing capital of the country, after Great Lakes and Pacific salmon. The abundance seemed unlimited. Hunters, fishermen, and naturalists alike all enjoyed the backwater lakes and the products of it on the Illinois River until they were drained. As Illinois attracted more residents, many of the lands were drained for farming. Large natural areas that were once prairies, bottomland forests, and wetlands were turned into crops. Backwater lakes had some of the best soil for producing crop, if you managed to drain it. Which a lot of lakes, such as Chautauqua, were drained and they were flooded within 10 years, so they were forced to sell the land. So there was difficulty in that. About that time, on April 13, 1923, the Mason County Democrat reported, "Take your last look at Thompson Lake. Soon it will be a large area of farmland. For several years, they have been working on building the levee. The lake will not be there very long. We have all the water out of Thompson Lake now. We were delayed in pumping it all out on account of the fish. They got out 600,000 pounds. The rest died," which was twice as many. So basically, Emaquan was levied off from the river, and then they installed water control structures to pump out the water. And then there you go. You have a big chunk of land that you could grow some corn or soybeans on or whatever you like. And that's exactly what happened both at Emaquan and Chautauqua. And this is how they did it. I mean, for the lakes, they pumped it out, but the entire area was a drainage district, which we'll get into that. So drainage districts are local bodies formed for the purpose of draining and ditching land for agricultural purposes. It wasn't just the lakes like Emaquan and Chautauqua. The entire surrounding area was considered a drainage district, and still today. This drastically changed the hydrology of the area as the water was and is still redirected. The tiles on the image here are the more traditional ones used, but initially they had used wood, such as burying logs. Today, of course, it's plastic. So basically, they install these pipes underneath the ground just to redirect the water. And so there you go. You turn a wetland into productive crops. But of course, if you do this to the whole area, it changes everything. So this is what happened. At the top is that initial drawing I showed everyone of how Thompson Lake and Flag Lake are considered Emaquan today. You can see right there where it says Thompson Lake Drainage and Levee District. It was bone dry. It wasn't restored until 2005 by the Nature Conservancy. And they've been working hard to get things better. So this drawing shows the hydrological changes in the area that can be seen from space. The mosaic of wetlands and sloughs were turned into straight lines and rectangular shapes. The drainage district was established, and the ecological paradise was quickly diminished. Habitats were destroyed as wetlands became dry and separated from the Illinois River. Plants that grew out of fluctuating water levels were no longer growing. So of course, permanent ecological damage was done. And the corridor for migratory species was quickly depleting, which we'll get into that. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Mississippi Flyway, but we'll get into it. In 1848, the Illinois and Michigan Canal was built to connect the Chicago River with the Illinois River. It was the first time the Great Lakes were connected to the Mississippi River. However, Chicago residents were increasingly facing polluted waters because of contamination. Cholera and typhoid fever were on the rise. So their solution to the contamination in the city was to reverse the Chicago River. Because the Chicago River was flowing so slowly, and basically it would go through Chicago and then feed it back into Lake Michigan, and then just kind of sit there. So that's why people were getting sick. They didn't have access to clean water. So basically they wanted to flush down all of that water downstream into the Illinois River. And one of the accounts I read was talking about Bubbly Creek. It's a creek connected to the Chicago River. They said it was so polluted or so contaminated that the chickens would walk on the water. So it was pretty bad. Of course, if you direct that to the Illinois River, then you're just moving the problem, but. Although the construction of the sanitary ship canal took years, the opening was nefariously done at midnight, January 2nd. It was about 20 days before they had said they would do it. They opened in the middle of the night, 20 days beforehand. because a lot of lawsuits were building up. Specifically, businessmen in St. Louis were not happy about the idea of the Chicago River being reversed and flushing all of these contaminants into the Illinois River. But they did it anyways. The Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal reversed the Chicago River from flowing into Lake Michigan and turned it into flowing into the Illinois River, which eventually feeds the Mississippi River. This generated drastic biological and ecological impacts that I wouldn't even be able to list in one presentation. But thanks to the students in University of Illinois and biologists in the Nature Conservancy and at Forbes Biological Station, we have more of an understanding of the impacts of the last 100 years. The diversion led to an increase of water levels and an increase of flooding. Many citizens lost their properties along the river due to the river reversal. After many lawsuits, lawmakers decided that the best solution to the increase in flooding was more infrastructure. So by the 1930s, locks and dams were built along the Illinois River to control the water levels and mitigate flood events. Data from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers shows the increase of erratic fluctuations and the increase of steady water levels. Increase in height of steady water levels. The bar graph above shows the annual frequency of the Illinois River reaching flood stage by decade, specifically in Havana. The line graph underneath shows the increase of water levels of the river. And the orange line there shows the water levels of Emaquan. You can see it's drastically increased. In general, they say the river has increased by 3 to 5 feet. Think of the wetland plants and other species that relied on the natural conditions of the river. Now that it was drastically altered, the flora and fauna was going to change as well. Man-made developments like these leave ecosystems vulnerable to disease and invasive species as conditions are permanently altered. This graph illustrates how the increase of water levels leads to sedimentation of backwater lakes. As water lifts sediment, it deposits it on bottomlands like backwater lakes, and essentially eliminating them. So when both Emaquan and Chautauqua lakes were drained for agriculture and they were levied off from the river, these levees actually became a blessing because they essentially separated the lakes from the river and protected them from being silted in. So we're actually grateful for that. Another issue with sedimentation is the dredging that they do on the Illinois River. Since it's primarily used for commercial transport, they need to maintain a navigable waterway. So they prefer, I think it's like 9 foot deep. And in order to do that, they have to constantly dredge. And so dredging is basically a huge machine that would lift buckets of sediment to make sure that the waterway is deep enough for the barges. But when they lift that up, all of that sediment eventually ends up downstream and depositing somewhere else. So it's just like a constant problem. Dredging stirs up sedimentation and deposits it in backwater lakes, increasing turbidity and destroying any chances for aquatic plants to establish. Which, of course, without aquatic plants, nothing is filtering or cleaning the water. And aquatic plants also provide nutrients and habitat to native species. Without these essential nutrients and habitat, the native species can't compete with the introduced species that quickly become invasive. Overall, habitat conditions on the Illinois River have been severely degraded in the last 100 years. Conservation efforts were on the rise as many began to notice the degradation of the ecosystem. The Clean Water Act was able to influence the excessive contamination added to the river, but many impacts have yet to be addressed. Habitat and fuel for migratory species are threatened by drained wetlands, unnatural fluctuations of river levels, sedimentation from dredging, and contamination. This is why the Illinois River Refuge Complex prioritizes growing duck food in backwater lakes. So this is where our mission comes in. The reason that we do what we do specifically here at Illinois River Refuges Complex. A river ecosystem provides a variety of habitats with varying levels of exposure to water. Sloughs, wetlands, and bottomland forests are just a few to name. Backwater lakes are essential to migratory species. As a river fluctuates seasonally, wetland plants are encouraged to grow. Without backwater lakes, migrating species populations would quickly decline as their habitat and sources of food would be gone. Changes done to the Illinois River and to the adjacent lands have impacted the populations by diminishing their source of fuel and eliminating a safe place to rest during long journeys. Backwater lakes also provide the land with an opportunity to refill aquifers with clean, filtered water. They are a great source for flood protection as well, as their lowlands keep the waters from going into more residential areas. Backwater lakes are found along rivers and provide the necessary food needed for many migrating species. Approximately half of North America's birds depend on what is depicted here as the Mississippi Flyway, which demonstrates the typical corridor migrating species travel through each year in North America. Mallards, bald eagles, peregrine falcons, canvasbacks, and snow geese are just a few notable species that rely on the ecosystems naturally found in this corridor. And we're lucky to be here too. So how do you grow duck food? And what do they eat? Due to the changes, we have to actively manage a backwater lake by manipulating how much water from the river is allowed in the lake and when. Water control structures allow water in or out. The refuge manager calculates when and how much water should be let in, depending on the amount of rain and other factors. But basically, we're mimicking nature. I'll show you how. This is a view of Chautauqua Lake. That's the Illinois River right there you see on the left side. that's when we're drawing down. So during the summer, it's the dry season. We let the plants grow. And then during the fall, we open the gates and let it flood in, dispersing all these seeds just in time for migrating species. Had some wetland plants growing there, duck food. I'll show you some of the food we grow here. We don't plant anything, we just manipulate water levels. Because of the drastic decline of wetlands, the need for reliable food and habitat for migratory species has increased. These are just some of the plants grown for waterfowl at Chautauqua. I see smart weeds all over the place too. This is another view of Chautauqua. You can kind of see Amaquan in the distance on the left, top left. And that's the river right there. So that's when we flood it. Each year we face management challenges such as willow trees and invasives, which threaten to change the wetlands or reduce the amount of duck food we grow. That's just another view. There's Rice Lake and Clear Lake, if you remember that drawing I showed earlier. Some more duck food. Lots of sedges. U.S. Fish and Wildlife is just one of many in a partnership to restore the area. Only in partnership can we make a real impact against the same challenges that we all face in conservation. So this is just a few of the people that we work together with. The Nature Conservancy is restoring natural floodplain communities on former agriculture levy districts as part of an overall Illinois River conservation plan. Among their goals is reestablishing the ecological processes that once supported the abundant and diverse biological communities along the river. Restoration plans have included reestablishing wetland habitats and working with the Corps of Engineers to provide and manage connection with the river with water control structures. Just like how we do. So the Nature Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service, they share ideas and basically try to mimic nature. Definitely, if you're very interested in Amaquan, I'd recommend checking them out when they have when it's snow geese season. And if you'd like to learn more about their mission and how they've restored Thompson and Flag Lake, feel free to visit their visitor area or their website. They also publish a lot of free published papers online that could easily be found. The most serious threats to the river during the last 100 years have been related to poor water and sediment quality. Excessive sedimentation, exotic species, and isolation of the river main stem from its floodplain. In spite of the fact that water quality has improved greatly in recent decades, the river is currently unable to support the diverse assemblages of fish, wildlife, macroinvertebrate, and plant species that were present prior to 1900. So prior to that river reversal. Although protected and restored areas, particularly in the lower pools, provide important habitat for a variety of fish and wildlife species, additional conservation measures, rehabilitation projects, and long-term monitoring are needed to improve the condition of this once highly productive ecosystem. This is just information or a management timeline that I like to show people. You can look at the graphs at the graph below of how much food we've grown and how we've managed over the years. But yeah, so that's the end of this presentation. I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. If you have any questions, you can put them into chat. I do have two questions that were pre-submitted when folks registered. Jane asked, are you adding any new properties along the river to the Emaquan Preserve?
So from what I understand, the Fish and Wildlife Service is prioritizing buying more land. And I think Emaquan, yes, I think Emaquan will grow more. But I would like to clarify that Emaquan is basically split with two parents, right? So the Nature Conservancy manages the Thompson and Flag Lake, and Fish and Wildlife Service manages the more boring side. Let me see. You can kind of see the brown part. So yes, we'll likely grow more as opportunities pop up. But it won't be the cool part of Emaquan, I guess. But along the river, absolutely. We're every year gaining more land.
Okay, and Nancy asked, how did you become interested in this area of history?
I'd say ever since I've worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service, it's been about 3 years now. I ended up working in wetland after wetland after wetland, and I just fell in love with wetlands and waterfowl. And at every refuge, they post historical narratives every year, which if you're interested, I could send you anyone these narratives, and they're just amazing to read. It gives you an idea of the area. So for the past year since I've been here, I've just read all of the narratives. It's just like hundreds of pages. It's a little bit depressing, to know that all of these changes were made, but it's encouraging to be a part of somewhat of a solution.
Okay, thank you for that. And yes, please send me the you can send me the links and I can post them with the program recording. And Lisa asks, the snow geese migration, when is it?
Trying to think peak. I may be wrong, but it would be sometime January, February, is their peak. I definitely welcome phone calls. I regularly get phone calls of people asking like how many ducks are in the lake right now, or geese, or when they're coming in. And then I can look into it really, because every year it kind of changes. But yeah, I would say January, February would be a great time.
Okay, and I have a question while we see if there's any more questions coming in. Is the Emaquan and the whole area, are there trails available to walk or look at the lakes?
Yeah, I would actually direct people to the Nature Conservancy side. Like I said, we manage the more boring, it's less touristy, I guess, is how I would put it. But they have a great visitor area. If you could just go to their website, it's not even much walking that you would have to do, and you'd be right on the lake. I think I showed, there we go. You can be right there.
Okay,
Looking
looks
at all the
wonderful.
snow geese.
Okay, I don't see if there's any more questions in the chat, so I will thank everyone for attending tonight's event. Please complete the survey that will appear when the Zoom ends. We appreciate your feedback. And now I will turn it back over to Elizabeth for closing comments.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, if you have any questions, feel free to email or call the office. Let's see, it would be 309-535-2290. Um, for any more questions. We do have trails at Chautauqua, which I would recommend. I personally clear them myself, along with the help of volunteers. We have great trails over here, and I would highly recommend bird watching at Chautauqua, which is just a 10-minute drive from Emaquan. So if you go to either one, it's best to just visit both because it'll have different species at each one, and sometimes one is more is busier than the other, depending on what you're looking for and all that.
Okay, thank you for that information. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. Good night.
Thank you.